The 396th edition of the Four Corners podcast starts right now.
This is the Four Corners podcast.
And that could make a difference. Lawson at the buzzer. Got it! Maybe not. Ty Lawson wins it at the buzzer.
Deep three. And Green rips down the rebound in traffic. 4-on-1.
What a great job. What a terrific job in transition. I mean, you couldn't plan that any better as a coach.
Gets the roll. Here we go. Page has it. Carolina down one. 84-83. Page into the front court with 4 seconds. Page to the rim. Got it! He got it! 9/10 of a second to go. Inbounds. Washington gets it to Warren. His full court shot. No good. Marcus Page baby. Does it for the Tar Heels. Carolina wins it.
Don't force it if you're Goss.
Comes in. Blocked by Meeks. Buried up ahead to Jackson. And he tucks it down for the 5-point lead. Matthews off the mark. And this year, the confetti is going to fall for North Carolina. They're not going to be denied this time. Inside 30 overall. Love, top of the key. Oh! Big time delivery.
Here are your hosts, Josh Marlowe and Anthony Pagnotta.
Hello and welcome into another live edition of the Four Corners podcast. We are powered by Carolina Electrical Services. Josh and Anthony back with you guys once again tonight, and it's a happy pod. One of the first ones we've actually been able to do this off season. Carolina, as you know by now, in case you didn't know, landed their second transfer portal commitment of the off season. Ven Allen-Lubin from Vanderbilt is transferring to North Carolina. We're here to break it all down, talk about him, talk about what it means for the roster moving forward, and a whole bunch more. But before we get into that edition of the show, we start every edition of the pod, as we always do, with the pod thought of the day. We go to baseball great, former baseball great, Babe Ruth, and today's pod thought is, quote, "You just can't beat the person who never gives up." One of the themes that we really hammered home this offseason was persistence. And Carolina needed to show a lot of it because they went after a bunch of dudes and they missed on a bunch of dudes. We've kind of made light of it, comparing it to us on a dating app, trying to find, a girlfriend. Carolina was trying to find a big man, trying to find someone to replace Harrison Ingram. And they haven't had a whole lot of success at doing that. But we knew this staff was working around the clock to ensure that they could find someone to come in here and help replace the lost production of Armando Bacot, of a Harrison Ingram. And after all that hard work, they finally got rewarded today with Ven Allen-Lubin, a guy that I don't think Carolina fans at the forefront were the most excited about, the most enthralled with, that being one of the guys that Carolina was turning to. But I think, as we'll talk about here, there's a lot to be cautiously optimistic and maybe even excited about what he's going to bring. But, it hasn't been the easiest offseason for Hubert Davis and his staff. But, as happy, I think, as we are for the player that's transferring into Carolina, I think it's okay to be happy for a staff that has put a lot in this offseason to rebuild and retool the roster to be ready to go to compete for a national championship next season. And with this man's commitment, they take a step forward in the right direction of doing just that.
Well, yeah, I mean, look, they had to add somebody. It's really that simple. You had to start somewhere. And this is a guy that, for the staff, I feel like, once you got through that initial wave of guys, this was somebody that they picked out and really looked at the upside with him and think that he pairs well with Jalen Washington down low. And that's the reason why they go out and get him. Is this a guy that's really going to blow people away? Probably not. Is there a chance that he can turn into a really good player for Carolina? Yeah, there definitely is. I mean, this is a guy that played at one time with some of the guys that are going to be on Carolina's roster this year, including Ian Jackson. So this is a guy that's got talent. There's no question about that. But I think the thing is you wonder, does he fit in at Carolina? And there's a couple of things with his game that we'll talk about that, I'm still kind of leery of. And I wonder, just how good of a player he can be in an ACC that's going to test him maybe a little bit more down low, playing in the post than he was tested in the SEC. But the thing is that Carolina needed a guy. Mainly they needed a guy that they could trust on the offensive end of the floor. It seems like the area that they're looking at the most. And Lubin is a guy that can definitely do that. And so I think this is something that Carolina fans, even if you're not the most comfortable with him just by looking at his stats, just by looking at where, the school that he comes from, whatever, it's one that if you take a second look, because I was very skeptical as well, if you read a little bit more about him, if you watch a little bit more of his game, there's a lot of things that you do like about him, and that should have you encouraged about what he can do for Carolina alongside Jalen Washington.
Yeah, I mean, look, statistically, I think it shows how spoiled we are as fans that you're bringing in a guy that averaged double-digit points at the power conference level and shot 50% from the field. And on the surface, Carolina fans weren't happy with the interest in him. And, I mean, I saw a lot of it today. There's a lot of concern about him. You look at his stats from last year, 12.3 points, 6.3 rebounds, shot 50% from the field. Just a 33% three-point shooter. It's not a big part of his game. For his career, between two stops at the power conference level, between Notre Dame and Vanderbilt, 9 points per game, 5 rebounds, 53% from the field, just a 28% three-point shooter. But then you get into what he does really, really well and some advanced stats. I saw Brennan Marks tweet this out. He was in the 99th percentile in second chance points per game, the 91st percentile on offensive rebounds per game, and shot 73% at the rim. Translation, he gets a lot of offensive rebounds and converts on a lot of offensive rebounds, or just converts when he's at the rim. What is probably of all the things that I have openly been critical of, and even maybe to the point complained about the last couple of years, it was that Carolina not efficient with their offensive rebounds because they were not averaging as many points per offensive rebound as you would have liked. And when it came to Armando, this was a guy that, I mean, every game there was a play or two at the rim that it felt like we would just be left scratching our head. Hey, how did you not finish through? How did you not finish that play? This is a guy that when he gets offensive rebounds, the ball's going to go back in the bucket, and he's going to do so in a very efficient manner. And make no mistake about it, Carolina needs that. Carolina needed to add someone to the roster that could capitalize on a consistent basis at the rim. Because on paper, who was that guy going to be outside of RJ? Like Jalen Washington's a guy that you want to play in the mid-range out to the three-point line. Like outside of your guard, you didn't have a guy that you could either put the ball inside to and he could score, or he could go grab a miss and score. They've got that guy now. And so, hey, look, I know when this was first reported, I wasn't the biggest fan of it. I was more optimistic about him than you were. And the more that I dug today, this is a guy that I think is going to be a really good piece to what Carolina wants to do next season. And Whether they get another guy or not, we'll talk about that later. The name isn't Clifford Amore. It's not Jonas Adu. It's not Omar Bala. But I do think, this is a roster that if this is it, and this is what Carolina rolls with when we get into the preseason, I think this roster took a step forward to being a national championship contender. And as I've stressed all offseason, with you returning a fan favorite like R.J. Davis, a program great like R.J. Davis, that needed to be the expectation. And I think they've gotten closer to meeting that with Ven Allen-Lubin coming to Chapel Hill.
Well, anybody that you brought in was going to get you closer to that. But the thing is like, this is still an acquisition that, don't make any mistakes about it. Like, this is no question in my mind, still an acquisition that means Jalen Washington has to play significant minutes. It may mean he has to start. Like, let's not just automatically count this as a guy that's going to come in and start, because he has very similar weaknesses to what we see from Jalen Washington in terms of, the defensive end of the floor. I think is the biggest concern with him. Now, I mean, I got to be honest. I think Jalen Washington might be a better defensive rebounder than he is. He's a really good offensive rebounder. There's no doubt about that. But I mean, this is a guy that still averaged a little over 6 rebounds a game last year. But is that really what you're wanting from a guy if he's playing, especially if you're counting on him to play, 30 minutes a game? If you are going to see him as your long-term starter, I don't know if you can do that. I mean, he averaged less than 4 defensive rebounds a game last year. The other concern for me is just how well can he defend against some of these bigger guys in the post in the ACC. Now, the good news is guys like PJ Hall, Quentin Post, both of those guys are graduated and gone. But there's going to be other big men that are going to come in here that Carolina is going to have to be prepared for. And is he a guy that, with his height disadvantage, can really cause problems for the opponent? He still averaged 1 block a game last year, which is pretty solid for a guy of his height. But I do kind of wonder, against some of these bigger guys that, these schools, especially, there's going to be other guys that are going to emerge. There are people that saw what Purdue did this last year, what UConn did with guys that were over 7 foot. You'd imagine that there are a lot of people that are looking for those types of bigs, and that kind of counteracts what Lubin is. So we'll see, but it'll be interesting. I think for him, you want to see him take a step in those areas, and that's certainly possible. That's the other thing here. And it's the same thing with Jalen Washington. It's like we've been saying for the majority of this offseason. There is room for both of these guys to grow. There is an offseason, still of workouts, and then eventually once they get on the court in the preseason, there's a chance for these guys to grow in certain areas. And so this is a guy, the biggest thing for me that I really like here is we talked about it when they got Harrison Ingram last year, when they got Cormac Ryan, Paxton Wojcik. This is a guy that's coming in here, and the biggest motivation for him to come to Carolina over anything is the fact that he wants to win, because he hasn't been able to do it at either one of his other 2 stops. It was the end of the Mike Bray era at Notre Dame. And then he goes to Vanderbilt. He probably thought, hey, I'm going to Vanderbilt. That's a team that was trending in the right direction towards the end of last year. Maybe I'm a guy that can help them take that next step. And look, he played pretty well. But that was a team that went in the complete opposite direction. Jerry Stackhouse ends up leaving. So for him, this has to be, one, it's a place of stability. He knows that his coach probably isn't going to leave at the end of the year unless it is just a complete disaster for Carolina. And he also probably feels like he gets a chance to compete to at least make the NCAA tournament. But as you said, I think this probably gets Carolina at least closer to, competing with Duke for that ACC regular season title. So I think that's the thing that I like the most, is that the motivation is going to be there. And you wonder, with him being coached by Hubert Davis in the staff now, will he be able to take the steps on the defensive end that'll allow him to be successful and help him to be maybe that second or third piece alongside of RJ Davis?
Yeah, like I think there was a reality check for him, honestly, with his recruitment in the transfer portal. Because remember, he visited Carolina 2 weeks ago and left, and it was pretty quiet. Like, I think we kind of all went into that visit with the expectation he was going to commit and maybe a Tar Heel. Didn't happen. And if you read about his recruitment, it looked like they were both going in different directions. But he circled back to Carolina. Carolina still expressed an interest in him. Excuse me. He ultimately ends up in Chapel Hill. And, I was doing just some more looking over of his numbers. You go to his per 40 numbers. His point per game average rises to 17.5, and his rebounds average to 9. And then if you go per 100 possessions, he goes to 25.8 points per 100 possessions and over 13 rebounds per 100 possessions. If we want to give him a nickname as we sit here tonight, like Mr. Efficient is this guy's name. Like everything he does outside of shooting the three ball, he does so in a very efficient manner. And I think that's going to do wonders for Carolina's offense. You said that he could compete to start over Jalen Washington. I think there's a really good chance he starts alongside Jalen Washington. I find it hard to believe that Carolina is going to play a 6'8" big man.
Wow. I'm going to tell you right now, they are not going to be a good team defensively then. Well, because this dude, I trust me, I have watched him I watched him again today. This dude cannot defend on the perimeter. He just can't. He's not built like that. So
are you just taking out the possibility that he's around better coaching and becomes a better player?
Yes. In order to guard on the perimeter, I don't see that in his game. He's built. I'm going to tell you who he reminds me a lot of. And I think what will end up happening is if they end up playing him alongside Jalen Washington is going to be like PJ Hall and have to guard on the perimeter. He is very similar, you're hoping, to Ian Shefflin because he's built almost exactly the same. Ian Shefflin 6'8", 225, Lubin 6'8", 230. So I've watched him a lot over these past couple of weeks, and I don't see a guy that can guard on the perimeter. I mean, he never did it at Vanderbilt, ever. So, I mean, if you're throwing him out there and just saying, hey, we're gonna have you figure it out along the way, I mean, especially with Carolina's early season schedule, it's going to be pretty rough out of the gate.
I mean, it's not figuring it out. It's being coached to do something. So,
I mean, Jalen, I'm going to tell you, there's no chance he starts over Jalen Withers. I'd be willing to bet a paycheck that he doesn't start over Jalen Withers at the 4. Not at the 4.
I mean, Carolina's not going to play a 6'8" man. They're just not. The league.
He's not gonna start, but he will play there. I'm going to tell you, like, you need to adjust the way that you look at how they play their big men. Like that, it's just that simple. Like there are guys that can do this. That's the thing about college basketball that's kind of weird. Now it's either you're going incredibly big, like Edey, like Klingon, or you're going a smaller, thicker built big that can scrap, get rebounds and stuff like that, similar to Norchad Omier, Ian Shefflin. That's the type of mold that I think Lubin fits. And I'm telling you, the fact that he can't shoot it from the outside. I mean, this dude has shot it 50 times from the outside in his career. He shot it 39 times this past year. He only made 13. Like, this dude, there's no way he can play the 4. He just can't, unless we're basically going to a traditional big. And I'm sorry, one off season, he's not improving his outside shot. Pete Nance shot the ball 90 times from the outside at Northwestern. And we basically said they were trying to make him into something that he's not. if they try to do the same thing with Lubin, it could go even worse for a guy that, I mean, just the three-pointer is not a part of his game. It just isn't.
Yeah, but and this is where I don't have to adjust to the way that I think about Carolina's going to use their 5-man, because you have your 5-man in Jalen Washington. That just because Ven Lubin's playing the 4 doesn't mean that Jalen Washington can't play on the perimeter and you put Ven Allen-Lubin down low on your offensive sets. With his offensive rebounding prowess, that's where he needs to be anyway, is going and cleaning up misses. And so would they be as good defensively as they were last year with him at the 4? I think that answer is no. Although
they would be one of the worst defensive teams in the ACC if he.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just going to look at the way that Hubert Davis was able to get this team to defend last year. And a lot of it is just like defense. I guess it comes down to ability and talent. It's 90% effort. Like if Carolina still competes on that end of the floor, they'll be an adequate defensive team. But what you could trade off for is a much more efficient offense, because you would be a lot more successful on in terms of your offensive rebounds, your second chance points, and be able to truly punish teams in ways that their offensive numbers didn't allow them to do last year, for how good of an offensive rebounding team that they became. Like by the end of the year, that was a traditional Carolina offensive rebounding team. It felt like they rebounded half of their misses, but they were converting on less than half of their second chance opportunities. That's not as ideal, but this is a guy that if he gets an offensive rebound, the proof is in the pudding. He's going to put the ball in the basket. And so when you mentioned those 5 guys like Norchad Omier and Ian Shufflin that played the 5, the thing about them were, yes, they were small in stature, 6'8", Norchad Omier 6'7". They could shoot the 3. He can't. So you're going to have to put him, quote unquote, at the 4. But this is where having Jalen Washington's ability, skill set, where he's more comfortable on the perimeter, doesn't really negate your ability to stretch the floor. If Jalen Washington wasn't a perimeter big, then yeah, I think there'd be more reason to be concerned about how he would fit into Carolina's offensive system. But Jalen Washington's more comfortable playing 12 feet away from the basket than he is 8 feet away from the basket. And so with that comes the ability to stretch the floor and still do all the things that Carolina wants to do offensively and needs to do offensively. So, I think, like, man, 3 weeks ago when we were just learning about him, I think there was reason to be concerned about, okay, could this guy come in and really make an impact at Carolina? Did he play for winning teams? No. There's no denying that Notre Dame and Vanderbilt, they weren't competing at the highest levels the last couple of years. But this is a productive player, and he's produced at 2 different spots at the power conference level. And I'm surprised that the fan base is this negative about bringing in a guy that I think is going to play an integral part of what Carolina does next season. And I think people need to be open-minded that this guy does stuff a little bit differently, but this coaching staff has proven they can bring transfers in and make them better players than they were at previous stops. I don't see why that couldn't be the case with Ven Allen-Lubin.
No, well, yeah. I mean, to me, like, look, if you're someone that just thinks that this is a horrendous pickup, there's no way this guy's actually going to succeed on this team, no matter what role he's put in, then I think you're pessimistic, or you're mad that Carolina didn't get some guy that you really, really love. This is a guy that is capable of making an impact here. There's a reason why he was successful last year. And that's the thing. Everybody's going to look at, well, he came from Vanderbilt and that team was horrible. Well, I mean, Harrison Ingram came from Stanford and that team was horrible. Cormac Ryan, the final year at Notre Dame was not a great year for Notre Dame. So you can't really go off of that. I think this is a guy that comes in. He will help you at that 5 spot. And I really think that it gives you some depth here that you can trust. And what it allows is for a guy like Zayden High to, hey, maybe he does end up taking that step forward. But if he doesn't, you have a guy that can now come in there, play alongside Jalen Washington, help split those minutes. It's also going to push Jalen Washington to be better. But yes, this is also a guy that, I think it's a low risk, high reward type pickup where if Carolina, if he turns out to be a player that can be that second, I probably lean third option because I really do think one of these guards, whether it's Elliot Cadeau or Ian Jackson, maybe even Drake Powell on the wing, somebody, and Cade Tyson also a possibility. Somebody's going to take that step this offseason and be a player that maybe we're not talking about enough right now, but could be that second guy next to RJ Davis. But could he be that third guy? Yeah, I think he's shown that he is capable of that, especially from a scoring perspective. So I think there's some things to like here. There's reasons to be cautious. There's reasons to not get overly excited about this and think that this is a guy that's going to be a first-team all-conference player or anything like that. But, yeah, to be overly critical of this move and say that you already know this isn't going to work out, I think that's probably pushing things a little bit too far.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like a lot of the negativity stems from the fact that Carolina was so involved with, they got involved with Ballo, they got involved with Adu, they got involved with Amori. They didn't get any of those guys. And so we just look at this guy and think, he's clearly not the player that those guys are. But, I've said it about virtually every transfer that Carolina brings in. You put a player with his proven production or with better talent, better coaching, we don't know what he's capable of doing. And so when we look at expectations for him, I think it's not – I don't think I'm asking too much to look at a guy that should average double-digit scoring and be maybe the second – probably at worst your second leading rebounder, and a guy that night in, night out is playing – once you get into conference play, you would imagine 26-plus minutes a night. And a guy that is going to be on the floor when you get into crunch time and when you get into your 4-minute offense and your 4-minute sets. I think this is a guy that it's going to be hard to keep him off the floor because of the things that he does so well. And so, I don't want to oversell him, but I think it's okay to look at him and say, he's going to be an impact transfer. And I think, when he's all said and done, I don't think he'll have – I'm not saying he's going to have the impact that Brady Manick had or that Harrison Ingram had. But I think once his time at Carolina is done, I think we'll look at him as another guy that Hubert Davis went and found in the portal and helped put his program in a position to compete for conference championships and national championships.
Yeah, I mean – again, we'll say I'm a little more cautiously optimistic than you for sure. I definitely think because, again, I don't see him being a guy that plays the 4. So I think, being his size, we'll have to see if it translates at Carolina to that 5 spot. And, again, we have to see what Jalen Washington is. This is a guy that could come in, could be – someone that comes off the bench and plays 18 minutes a game. Jalen Washington plays the rest of the game. We'll have to see. So, but yeah, I mean, there's things to like about him, and the thing I like the most is the motivation that he brings to the table. This is going to be a dude that's motivated to prove that he can be a part of a team that is contending for something. And I think. We'll know right away. We'll get a good sense of where he's at pretty early in the season. If he's a guy that comes in and is doing similar things to what he did at Vanderbilt in terms of, ripping down those offensive rebounds, finishing those second chance points, there's going to be a pretty decent role on this team for him. But if, he struggles, on the defensive end of the floor, an area that we are a little bit concerned about, if they are trying to make him a 4 and he's just not able to stretch the floor, similar to what we saw from Pete Nance, then you wonder, does Carolina have to make adjustments? And is this a guy that just ends up becoming a rotational piece off the bench? And that's the other thing, is that if that ends up happening, it's not the end of the world. That is a guy that can still contribute to you. And there are other guys on this team that can step up. I mean, again, I don't think we've talked about it enough that this could be the guy that ends up being the backup big. He could also be the starting big for Carolina. And again, split time almost evenly with Jalen Washington. And you could have Cade Tyson as that guy that's at the 4. And you just go smaller. I think that's certainly a possibility, especially if Drake Powell shows what he showed a lot of people on the recruiting trails in his senior year that allowed him to make the jump that he did. So I think, again, it's all about what is the role that he is in. Once we figure that out, I think then we will have a better understanding of what exactly this team could be. But yeah, I mean, there's no denying that, the reason people aren't nearly as excited is because you swung and missed on some of these guys. With some of the guys like Ballo, they were never in it for Ballo, guys. They never were. Like, he listed them, and let's be honest, he listed them. What, they contacted him? He said, I want to set an official visit. He knew right away when he said Indiana as his first visit, that was where he was going. Like, yeah. I mean, so were they ever really in it? Adu, they were apparently in it, but they never even got him on campus. So, like, those are the guys where people that are so angry about those guys not coming to Carolina, they were never even entertaining the fact that they were going there. They were probably wanting a significant amount of money. I mean, I don't know. Indiana has landed multiple big names in the portal, so you'd imagine they're willing to pay up a pretty decent amount. We know Arkansas is willing to pay up a lot. So, and then with Amori, like, look, that was just one where I got to be honest with him. It seemed like there was something personal with Carolina. Not really sure what it was. I don't know if it was just that they didn't offer any money. But when he put out the thing of Clifford the Big Red Dog dunking on what looked to be Carolina players, that pretty much showed you that whatever it was, something about Carolina rubbed him the wrong way, and he wasn't going to come to Carolina. So, I mean, it just is what it is. This is the new era that Carolina is living in. And when you got a guy like Hubert Davis that wants guys to be there for the name on the front of the jersey and not the name on the back, this is almost the wrong era in certain respects for that. But I'm telling you, Hubert Davis has shown that he can win that way. It's just when it comes to this and in the offseason, he's probably not going to wow you like some of these other coaches are with bringing in guys that are simply about the name on the back of the jersey. They're about how much money they can make, and they don't really care about the team. They just don't.
That's our look at Ven Allen-Lubin, the second transfer that Carolina has landed this offseason. When we come back, we'll talk about what his commitment means for the rest of the roster. Carolina does have 2 scholarships that that can be filled before next season. We'll talk about how they should go about it when we come back. But first, we got to play you a quick word from one of our partners.
Hey there, Josh here for the Autograph Fandom app. Want to get rewarded for listening to our show? The team at Autograph, co-founded by Tom Brady, is redefining the fan experience by letting users earn points for the acts of fandom they take every day, like listening to this show. The Autograph Fandom app gives you access to your favorite UNC content in one place and offers rewards like tickets, exclusive merchandise, and much more. You're already listening to our show, but now you can earn points and get rewarded for it. Head over to the Apple App Store and search for Autograph Fandom Rewarded and download it today for free using the referral code HEELTOUGH. Link and code are also in our podcast description.
Welcome back inside another live edition of the Four Corners Podcast. Hanging out with you on a Thursday. And I did want to mention some of the comments that we've gotten. Eric Lenz commented on YouTube, this team's not good enough, plain and simple. Bold statement considering this team hasn't played a game together, but, we all have a right to our opinion. Greg Ward, a guy that comments all the time. We appreciate Greg. I feel pretty good about how this roster is coming together. Me too. I think when this thing is all said and done, we'll look at a team that can say they can compete to win a national championship. And I wasn't saying that 2 weeks ago. Then we got Brian Taylor who commented on Facebook, are we still trying to get Onyensu? And that's where we're going to move next. Carolina has 2 scholarships left that can be filled going in to next season. We know that they're involved with Onyensu, the Kentucky transfer, and Coleman Hawkins, the Illinois transfer. They're waiting on NBA draft decisions on both. Coleman Hawkins is a guy that has publicly stated his preferred destination is not to return to college. If he can get a guaranteed contract of some sort in the NBA, he's going pro. Onyensu, the expectation he's going to be back in college, and with Carolina going to be in the fold for him. So with that brings us to an interesting conversation. John Calipari, as if you follow college basketball on a national landscape, made waves when he left Kentucky for Arkansas and has to rebuild that program. Quite literally, he showed up with 0 scholarship players and has had to re-recruit high school players and transfers. He made it known that he's going to start carrying 11 scholarships and leaving 2 scholarships open to better be able to fill the roster for the next year through the transfer portal. And I think something that we haven't talked a lot about in the portal era is how coaches and teams go about filling their roster, because you're used to seeing all those scholarships filled. Is there a situation where this is it for Carolina and Hubert Davis looks at his roster, is satisfied, sees enough talent, depth to compete to win a conference championship and a national championship, and realize next year is going to be big? You're going to have to replace maybe a lot more talent with R.J. Davis, definitely gone from the program. Then you're going to lose, you would imagine, a 5-star prospect in Ian Jackson, who would be one and done, to leave those extra roster spots open for either high school recruits or transfers. Is that something that's on the table, or do you expect Hubert Davis and his staff to exhaust all possibilities of adding 2 more scholarship players to the roster?
They should. They won't. I think they're done. I don't think they're going to add anybody else. Hawkins is not coming here. I'm just going to put that one out there. I don't see it unless Carolina is willing to pretty much waive the thing that I talked about when it came to Hubert Davis and the mindset that he takes going into the portal. Coleman Hawkins, I mean, you said it right there when we were talking about him just a minute ago. This is a dude that wants a guaranteed contract in the NBA, or if he comes back to college, he wants as big of an NIL collective payment as anybody in the country, which is amazing to me. This is a dude that hasn't even been an all-conference player in his time at Illinois. But, I mean, yeah, he's going to be looking for who is going to pay him the most money. And so I don't see that happening. Onyensu, I mean, I got to be honest, I don't know what he's going to do. He might be a guy that just ends up going to the NBA because he's got the ability to protect the rim, and he'll be drafted probably in the late 50s, and he'll end up landing on a roster somewhere. If he's out there, I think there's a chance Carolina goes after him, but also I feel like they probably would feel like they're clogging up that 5 spot, because then you'd have Jalen Washington, Lubin, as well as him. Not to mention, you're still figuring out Zayden High, who has put on weight. Apparently, is trying to become a guy that can contribute for you either at the 5 or the 4 spot. So I think in their mind, they're probably looking at this, and also James Brown coming in as well. How many guys are you going to have down low? I think if they were going to go get Onyenso, I think all the rumors that we heard from the different message boards sort of back this up. If they were going to get Onyenso, it was going to be because they were not going to take Lubin. The fact that they took Lubin, I think, kind of seals the deal that they're not going after Onyenso. Now, the reason I say they should exhaust everything to go out and get somebody else, they need somebody at the 4 spot. I got to be honest. I don't understand. And again, Hubert Davis knows his team better than I do. I don't understand how you look at the group that's at that 4 spot, even if for some reason you think Lubin is going to be able to play out there. I think the fact that he hasn't guarded on the perimeter, the fact that he hasn't shot the ball well from the outside in his career, really a lot at all, that should at least have you hesitant to put everything in his hands and have you looking at some of the other options. There are guys that are out there that I think could help this team, like Arthur Kaluma. That's the one guy that I would look at. I don't understand why they are not looking harder at this group of possible stretch 4 guys to bring in. I get wanting to leave the door open, more scholarships open for the future, because you might find guys in the portal next year. You might find guys at the high school level. I mean, they have offered a bunch of guys in the 2025 class. But the thing is that you brought back RJ Davis for a reason. You're wanting to win next season. You want to win and win at a high level. So if you're wanting to do that, then you have to find somebody, even if it's a guy that's just there for 1 year. Like Lubin's a guy that can be there for multiple years. Cade Tyson, multiple years. If you can find a guy that is going to be there for 1 year that can help you. And I think they need to seriously consider that, even though it doesn't seem like they are, for that stretch 4 spot.
Yeah, I feel like on the surface they are done. I was reading some stuff the other day that if Hawkins does return to college, Carolina would be the early favorite once those talks were to heat up.
And my thing is it because nobody else wants him?
Well, I mean, I don't think it's that. I mean, you're talking about a guy that has played and produced at a high level, was a big part of what Illinois did last year. I think,
but that's why I'm saying I don't understand why they would be the favorites, because, I mean, he has literally come out and said it. I want money. I mean.
Yeah, and look, I think, if he could go back and do it again, he probably wouldn't have said it the way that he said it. I think basically, if you want to spin it in a positive, he wants to play for a winner and winner's pay. And I don't think Carolina would be against paying him, because you add him to this roster, you can win a national championship. Mm-hmm. You can do a lot of things. He'll bring the edge that you want. He'll bring the toughness that you need. We talk about experience. He's played at the college level for quite some time, played on the big stage in the Big Ten and the NCAA tournament. Do I ultimately think he ends up in Chapel Hill? I don't. Same thing with Onyenso. I once the Ven Allen-Lubin stuff started heating back up earlier in the week, it became an either-or situation where Carolina was going to get one or the other. I don't think that Carolina wasn't willing to wait on Onyenso to make his decision. I think when they re-engaged with Ven Allen-Lubin, I think, there was just – it clicked more the second time around as a guy that fits here. We saw the tweet from RJ. RJ was very excited about him coming to Carolina. And I think they, a little bit more time, a little bit more homework. Maybe they're seeing, okay, this guy can really be a big part of what Carolina wants to do. So I think they're done. Knowing Hubert and the way that Carolina does things, they'd probably put the walk-ons, just put them on scholarship because they have them there, and they'll be gone next season. So the scholarships would vacate. But make no mistake about it. This is like John Calipari wasn't just saying what he said to say it. Like, this is the future of roster building in college basketball. where you're not going to fill your roster with scholarships because you don't want to lock yourself in to a roster number that makes it hard to add talent the next offseason through the portal, or as you mentioned, with all the players Carolina offered the other day, they offered 5 players in a 24-hour span through the high school ranks. And so I don't disagree with that. On the surface, makes a lot of sense. I understand why that it's moving that way. And it's why I think Carolina has to consider adding that general manager position to its basketball program. Seen programs like Duke. I know Duke and Villanova have one. I'm pretty sure either Kansas or Kentucky have one. Like in this era of roster building, it makes sense to have a guy that is your quote-unquote general manager at the college level. And I think that's something that Hubert Davis needs to look to add to his staff. So Carolina is maximizing its roster potential in the years to come. With that, that is going to wrap up this edition of the Four Corners podcast. Before we let you go, we encourage you to visit the website, HeelToughBlog.com. Go back, read more about Ven Allen-Lubin's transfer into Carolina, as we had you covered with that news. And basically, we've had you covered all offseason long for Carolina basketball and Tar Heel football with transfer portal news, high school recruiting news, roster moves, you name it, we've had you covered. We want you to visit the website every single day. That's HeelToughBlog.com for the latest and the best Carolina basketball and Tar Heel football coverage. As for the podcast, you guys know where to find us. Every major podcasting platform. We encourage you guys to rate, review, and subscribe. We mentioned all those high school players Carolina offered earlier this week. We're going to come back next week because we're on the eve of a holiday weekend. We'll be back either Monday or Tuesday talking about the 5 guys that Carolina offered in the 2025 class and how important that 2025 class is for Hubert Davis as he looks to set his program up for long-term success. Make sure you hit that subscribe button. That way you don't miss any editions of the show throughout the basketball off season. Well, with that, guys, this is going to wrap up this edition of the show. Do want to thank Anthony once again for hosting with me. We want to thank you guys for watching and listening. And as always, go Tar Heels.